One of my favorite people in the whole entire world, Miss Diana Ross.
You know, Michael and I, we're in love, and there's nothing to do about it. There's nothing to say. So, I refuse you to insult Michael. He's a friend of mine. I love him, and I don't like people making fun.
You need to hear what Diana Ross has finally admitted about Michael Jackson, because the truth behind their relationship is a lot deeper and a lot heavier than most people ever realized. For years, the public saw them as incredibly close, but very few people understood just how intense that bond really was behind closed doors.
I wasn't introducing you, Michael. You weren't? No. Well, who else do you think makes the stage come to real?
Michael didn't just look up to Diana Ross as a mentor or music icon. At different points in his life, he openly referred to her as his mother, his closest friend, and even his great love, which only added to the mystery surrounding their connection.
What I didn't know is that you were going to get so sexy. You're embarrassing.
And this wasn't some distant Hollywood friendship either. When Michael was still barely a teenager trying to navigate sudden fame and enormous pressure, he actually lived inside Diana Ross's home for a period of time. She became one of the few people he genuinely trusted during those early years when his life was changing faster than most people could even imagine.
They came to live with me in California for, it seemed like
From the engagement that quietly fell apart to the stories about a private room inside Michael Jackson's mansion filled with thousands of candles supposedly burning for Diana Ross around the clock, their relationship has always carried an almost unbelievable level of emotion and mystery. And then there was the music.
That you seduce every man, this time you won't seduce.
At one point, Michael reportedly wrote lyrics many people believed were aimed directly at Diana after tensions between them grew. The line, "This time you won't
That you seduce every man, this time you won't
seduce me," became part of the speculation surrounding just how complicated their connection had become behind the scenes. But out of everything tied to their history together, the part that still leaves many people stunned is the way Diana Ross chose to stand beside Michael during the darkest chapter of his public life. When the allegations and scandals surrounding his legacy exploded across headlines worldwide, a lot of celebrities distanced themselves completely. Some stayed silent. Others avoided even mentioning his name publicly. Diana Ross did the opposite. She openly defended him at a time when doing so came with enormous public backlash and scrutiny.
I refuse you to insult Michael. He's a friend of mine. I love him, and I don't like people making fun.
And for many people watching from the outside, that raised even more questions about the depth of their bond and what she may have known about the man behind the global superstar image. So let's really get into this story. By the time Michael Jackson first entered Diana Ross's world, she was already an established icon. Diana was 14 years older than him and had already reached a level of fame most artists spend their entire lives chasing. She wasn't just successful, she was one of the most glamorous and influential women in entertainment, carrying herself like true music royalty long before Michael became the king of pop. Michael Jackson was only 11 years old when the Jackson 5 signed with Motown in 1969, and from the moment he entered the orbit of Berry Gordy and the Motown machine, Diana Ross became someone he emotionally attached himself to in a way that would influence him for the rest of his life. Berry Gordy immediately recognized there was something extraordinary about Michael. He famously described the young star as being like James Brown and Sammy Davis Jr. combined into one child. Even at that age, Michael already had a level of charisma, timing, and stage presence that stunned experienced industry executives. But behind the scenes, Motown was also carefully crafting a public image and narrative around the group. One of the biggest stories pushed during the rollout was the idea that Diana Ross herself had personally discovered the Jackson 5. In reality, that story was largely a publicity strategy created by Berry Gordy to give the group a more glamorous and marketable introduction through one of Motown's biggest stars. And that wasn't the only detail adjusted for the public. The label also heavily promoted the idea that Michael was just 9 years old when he signed, even though he was actually 11 at the time. It may seem like a small difference now, but in the entertainment industry, making him appear even younger helped strengthen the image of Michael as a once-in-a-generation child prodigy. Still, despite the marketing and manufactured narratives surrounding the group, one thing that wasn't fake was Michael's connection to Diana Ross. Very early on, she became more than just a Motown star in his eyes. She represented safety, glamour, affection, and the kind of emotional warmth he often seemed to be searching for throughout his entire life. The real story behind Michael Jackson and Diana Ross was far less polished than the public image Motown presented, and a lot more emotionally complicated. In 1969, Michael actually lived with Diana Ross for about a year, and during that time, their bond became incredibly intense. According to people close to the family, Michael called Diana Mama. But what made the relationship even more unusual was that he also reportedly referred to her as his girlfriend at different points, blurring emotional lines in a way that many people later found difficult to fully understand. Michael's mother, Katherine Jackson, later confirmed in her own book that Michael frequently called Diana Mama, and she acknowledged that the attachment between them stood out from the very beginning. Even as a child, Michael seemed deeply emotionally connected to Diana in a way that went beyond a normal mentor relationship. And Michael himself never really hid how strongly he idolized her. At one point, he reportedly told his sisters, LaToya Jackson and Janet Jackson, that they were not truly beautiful until they looked like Diana Ross. It was a comment that shocked people later because it revealed just how deeply Diana had shaped Michael's ideas about beauty, femininity, and emotional comfort during his formative years. Over the course of his life, Michael repeatedly described Diana as his mother, his friend, and his great love all at once. And what makes those statements so striking is that he didn't seem to mean them symbolically. By many accounts, he genuinely struggled to separate those emotional categories when it came to her. For Michael, Diana Ross became more than just a celebrity mentor. She became the maternal figure he emotionally attached himself to during the most important and vulnerable stage of his rise to fame. A connection that appeared to stay with him for the rest of his life. Diana Ross had become more than a mentor or emotional protector in Michael Jackson's life. Over time, she also became the woman he dreamed of marrying. And what makes their story so psychologically complex is that both of those emotions seem to exist inside him at the same time. He viewed her as a maternal figure, but also as the great romantic ideal he could never fully let go of. According to people who followed Michael closely throughout his life, those feelings never completely resolved themselves. Diana occupied a space in his emotional world that no one else ever truly replaced. For many observers, she became the love Michael was never realistically going to be allowed to have, at least not in the way he may have imagined. And because of that, some people believe much of what followed in Michael's romantic life reflected repeated attempts to recreate or fill an emotional space that had already been claimed decades earlier by Diana Ross. No matter who entered his life later, there always seemed to be part of him emotionally tied back to the woman who had become such a powerful presence during his earliest years of fame. By 1977, the dynamic between them had shifted into something even more complicated. Michael was now 19 years old, no longer the child prodigy the world first met, while Diana was 33 and already an established entertainment icon with years of experience navigating fame, relationships, and public scrutiny. And as Michael got older, the emotional attachment he had toward Diana didn't disappear. If anything, it appeared to deepen. In 1977, Michael Jackson and Diana Ross reunited professionally for The Wiz, the film adaptation of the famous Broadway musical being shot in New York City. Diana played Dorothy, while Michael took on the role of the Scarecrow. And for the first time since Michael had lived in Diana's home as a child, the two were spending long stretches of time together again in close proximity. People around the production reportedly noticed almost immediately that the energy between them felt unusually intense. There was already years of emotional history connecting them, and by this point, Michael was no longer a little boy looking up to a superstar. He was a young man whose attachment to Diana seemed deeper and more emotionally complicated than ever. One story from the set became especially infamous among people connected to the production. According to reports, Diana went to Michael's apartment one evening during filming and stayed there until the next morning. The following day, when an assistant was trying to track Michael down, they reportedly called the apartment and were surprised to realize Diana was still there. That instantly fueled speculation among people working around them. The implication of what may or may not have happened lingered in the air, even if nobody said it directly at the time. According to stories that later circulated, Diana jokingly told friends on set afterward that one thing had definitely been confirmed that night, that Michael was not gay. The comment only added more mystery to a relationship that already fascinated people behind the scenes. And what made the situation even more intriguing was the way both of them handled questions about it afterward. When someone reportedly asked Michael directly what had happened that night, he told them to ask Diana. But when Diana was asked, she reportedly responded by telling them to ask Michael instead. Neither one of them ever publicly confirmed or denied anything outright. But for many people watching their dynamic over the years, the refusal to clearly explain it only deepened the speculation surrounding the true nature of their relationship. Michael Jackson reportedly didn't just admire Diana Ross, he genuinely wanted to marry her. According to stories that circulated within people close to the family, the two were even rumored to have been engaged at different points, with some accounts claiming the engagement happened twice and that Diana ultimately ended it both times. The explanation most often attached to her decision was practicality and public perception. By that stage, Diana Ross was already a legendary figure in entertainment, and marrying a man 14 years younger than her could have triggered enormous media backlash during that era. Hollywood and the press were far less forgiving about age gap relationships at the time, especially when the woman was older and already such a high-profile public figure. And that's where the complexity of their story becomes impossible to ignore. The same age difference that seemed harmless or even nurturing when Michael was a child living under Diana's guidance suddenly looked very different once he became an adult man in his 20s, while Diana was approaching 40. For many people around them, it created a relationship dynamic that felt emotionally intense, but also incredibly difficult to define publicly. What makes the story even more fascinating is that Michael himself never really stopped referencing Diana in deeply personal ways throughout his life. Years later, in the liner notes for his History, Past, Present, and Future, Book 1 album, Michael referred to Diana Ross as his mysterious love. And the wording caught fans' attention immediately because it didn't sound symbolic or casual. It sounded deeply emotional and strikingly direct. That single phrase reignited years of speculation about whether their relationship had gone far beyond what either of them had ever publicly admitted. At that point, many fans openly started asking the question that had quietly followed them for decades. Was there something much deeper happening between Michael Jackson and Diana Ross than the public was ever allowed to fully know? Michael Jackson reportedly told close friends that he always carried a photograph of him and Diana Ross with him wherever he went. But for him, it wasn't just a sentimental keepsake. According to accounts shared over the years, the image functioned almost like an emotional anchor, a symbol of how deeply Diana had become woven into his sense of identity from a very young age. As Michael's adult life became increasingly chaotic, public, and often isolating, those close to him suggested that he seemed to mentally return more and more to the version of Diana that existed in his memory from when he was around 11 years old. It wasn't just nostalgia, it appeared to be a fixed emotional reference point he never fully moved past. And what was happening inside his home reportedly reflected that attachment in an even more extreme way. Inside one of his mansions, Michael allegedly dedicated an entire room to Diana Ross. The space was filled wall to wall with her photographs, paintings, and carefully arranged imagery of her presence. According to stories shared by people who had seen parts of his home, he also kept thousands of candles burning in that room continuously, 24 hours a day, every day, for years, all surrounding central images of Diana. Michael would refer to her as a goddess, and those who knew him said he used the word very seriously, not casually. In his mind, she represented something larger than life, a figure of emotional devotion that blended admiration, attachment, and idealization into one. Some accounts suggest the candle ritual itself came from advice Michael heard as a child from an Obeah practitioner, who told him that keeping candles burning around the image of someone you loved would ensure they never left you. Whether taken literally or symbolically, Michael reportedly carried that idea with him into adulthood and incorporated it into the way he structured parts of his private space. Over time, what started as childhood admiration reportedly became something far more consuming, a lifelong emotional fixation that shaped how he related to love, memory, and attachment well into his later years. Michael Jackson reportedly told friends that he carried a photograph of him and Diana Ross with him everywhere he went. But according to those accounts, it wasn't just sentimental, it represented something much deeper. It symbolized how completely Diana had become embedded in his identity, shaping the way he understood love, attachment, and even himself from a very early age. As Michael's adult life became more chaotic, isolating, and heavily scrutinized, those close to him suggested he increasingly reached back toward the version of Diana that existed in his mind when he was still a child of around 11 years old. That early emotional imprint seemed to remain the strongest reference point in his inner world, even as everything around him changed. What reportedly happened inside his home took that attachment to an extreme level that even some of his closest friends found difficult to speak about openly. Michael allegedly had an entire room in one of his mansions dedicated to Diana Ross. The space was filled with photographs and paintings of her, and according to multiple accounts, he kept thousands of candles burning in that room continuously, arranged around central images of Diana day and night as a constant ritual of devotion. He referred to her as a goddess, and those who knew him said he used the word very deliberately. The candle ritual itself was reportedly inspired by advice he received as a child from an Obeah practitioner, who told him that if he kept candles burning around the image of someone he loved, that person would never leave him. Michael is said to have taken that idea seriously enough to incorporate it into the way he structured parts of his private space. Over time, that imagery even appeared in his creative work. In one of his music videos, scenes reportedly showed crowds holding candles surrounding an image of Diana, reinforcing just how central she remained in his emotional narrative. No other woman in his life was ever associated with that same level of symbolic devotion. Then came the moment that, for a time, made Michael believe everything was finally aligning, the engagement he thought would change his life. In the mid-1980s, Diana reportedly told him she would marry him, and for a period, Michael believed his long-held dream was about to become reality. She was seen wearing a ring he had given her, including appearances at major public events such as the Motown 25, Yesterday, Today, Forever, and the 1984 American Music Awards. At the AMAs, Diana even kissed him on the mouth and held his face so the cameras could clearly capture the ring on her finger, a moment that instantly became iconic and widely discussed. When Michael told his mother, Katherine Jackson, about the engagement, the reaction was reportedly harsh. She believed Diana was too old for him and feared it would damage his public image. The situation quickly escalated into public controversy, with the press seizing on the narrative and labeling Diana in extremely critical terms, including headlines that branded her as a cradle robber. The pressure surrounding the relationship became overwhelming. Diana ultimately did not marry Michael. Instead, she later married Norwegian shipping heir Arne Næss Jr. And for Michael, what had once felt like a lifelong emotional certainty collapsed into a very public and painful ending in front of the world. Diana Ross's marriage to Arne Næss Jr. was complicated almost from the beginning. The two lived much of their married life on different continents, with Diana based largely in the United States, while Arne's life and work often kept him tied to Europe. In interviews at the time, Diana explained that living in Norway long-term simply wasn't realistic for her. She described the climate as too cold and dark, and she also emphasized that she didn't want to be separated from her children, her family, and her career in America. That physical distance created a marriage structure that functioned less like a traditional shared life and more like two parallel worlds. Because of that arrangement, Diana had significant independence within her American life. And according to people within her social and industry circle, that independence included continued contact with Michael Jackson. Rumors circulated in entertainment spaces suggesting that their connection didn't fully disappear even after her marriage, although these claims were never publicly confirmed by either of them. For Michael, the marriage was emotionally devastating. Friends described him as heartbroken, yet still deeply attached to Diana in a way he seemed unable to break free from. Even as his life and career moved forward, that emotional pull reportedly remained constant in the background. Years later, Michael addressed Diana directly in his autobiography, Moonwalk. In it, he wrote that he had always loved her and always would. The line stood out because it didn't feel like publicity language or image management. It read like one of the most personal and unfiltered statements in the entire book regarding his romantic and emotional life.
And I think it got to a point where he really loved her and he really liked her, still to this day. And
people close to Michael understood exactly who he was referring to. And for many fans, that single sentence reinforced just how enduring Diana Ross's presence was in his life, long after the headlines, relationships, and years had passed. Their interactions gradually slowed across the late 1980s and into the 1990s as both of their lives moved in very different directions. Diana Ross began focusing more heavily on her family and personal life, while Michael Jackson was consumed by global touring, recording, and the growing intensity of worldwide fame. On the surface, the connection looked more distant, but according to people around them, it never fully disappeared. During this period, there were only a small number of public interactions between them that were widely documented. However, those close to both camps often suggested there were many more private moments that the public never saw, and that the emotional thread between them remained intact in ways outsiders couldn't fully measure. One of the most frequently repeated stories from this era comes from 1995 when Michael was hospitalized. It was reported that he asked for his then-wife, Lisa Marie Presley, to be removed from his room before Diana arrived to visit him. According to accounts of the moment, Michael wanted Diana to have the space alone when she came in. During the visit, he reportedly showed her deep affection, gave her gifts, and told her she was his world, reinforcing just how emotionally central she still was to him, even decades after their initial bond formed. Within Michael's emotional life, Diana also became a recurring reference point in his romantic struggles. He allegedly confided to friends that she would sometimes present herself as wanting fame or money, but whenever he tried to move forward with other relationships, she would reappear in his life in ways that pulled him back emotionally. Some close to him described this dynamic as a cycle he felt unable to escape, where Diana didn't necessarily choose him in a conventional romantic sense, but also didn't fully release him to anyone else. In his eyes, it created a confusing form of emotional possession that kept him psychologically tethered to her. Over time, the relationship stopped fitting into any simple category of romance, friendship, or mentorship. Instead, it became something far more unresolved. A decades-long emotional attachment that neither Diana Ross nor Michael Jackson ever fully managed to define or close.
And Michael and I, we're in love, and there's nothing to do about it, there's nothing to say.
Michael Jackson reportedly wrote Dirty Diana during one of the lowest emotional points of his long and complicated attachment to Diana Ross. By that stage, according to accounts shared over the years, Michael had spent years trying to win her affection in different ways, emotionally, personally, and even materially, including lavish gifts and constant attempts to keep her close in his life. Yet from his perspective, she repeatedly chose other relationships instead. Within the narrative Michael seemed to be processing, the pattern of those relationships stood out to him. Diana had been linked at different times to well-known figures such as Lionel Richie, Barry Gibb, and Gene Simmons. In Michael's emotional framing, this became part of the story he was trying to express through the song, specifically the idea of her being drawn to boys in the band, a line that many interpreted as a direct reflection of his frustration and confusion over why he never seemed to be the one she ultimately chose. The Gene Simmons story in particular became part of the mythology surrounding that period. According to widely circulated accounts, there was an alleged moment involving Diana calling out Michael's name during an intimate encounter with Gene, which reportedly caused tension between the two men. That incident was said to have contributed to long-standing friction between them, even though Michael himself was not directly involved in what occurred. Out of this emotional chaos and unresolved attachment came Dirty Diana, a song that many fans interpret as Michael trying to process jealousy, heartbreak, and a sense of emotional exclusion tied to a relationship he never fully managed to define or let go of. Michael Jackson wrote Dirty Diana while he was going through what many close to him described as one of the most emotionally intense periods of heartbreak tied to Diana Ross. In that version of events, he had spent years trying to win her affection in different ways, emotionally, materially, and through constant attempts to stay close, even reportedly spending large amounts on gifts in an effort to make her happy. But from his perspective, she continued choosing other relationships instead. Within the story, Michael seemed to be processing. The pattern of those relationships became part of the emotional backdrop. Diana had been linked at different times to figures such as Lionel Richie, Barry Gibb, and Gene Simmons. The lyric referencing her liking the boys in the band is often interpreted as a direct reflection of that perceived pattern, written from the point of view of someone trying to understand why he repeatedly felt left out of her romantic choices. The Gene Simmons story in particular became part of the surrounding lore. According to widely repeated accounts, there was an alleged moment involving Diana calling out Michael's name during an intimate situation with Gene, which reportedly caused tension and lasting resentment. Whether fully accurate or not, that story became tied to the emotional mythology people associate with the period leading up to the song. From that emotional state came Dirty Diana, a record many fans view as heartbreak and anger translated into music. According to people close to the recording process, the second verse of the song was so direct and personal that producer Quincy Jones reportedly became concerned, warning Michael that industry insiders would immediately recognize who it was about. He is said to have urged Michael to soften parts of it. As a result, the second verse was reportedly adjusted so the song could be publicly framed as being about an obsessive fan or groupie following musicians, rather than a specific individual. Even so, the first and third verses still carried the emotional intensity, longing, and unresolved attachment that listeners often associate with Michael's personal life at the time. According to the narrative, Diana recognized herself in the song immediately and did not speak to Michael for a period afterward. When they eventually reconnected, she reportedly surprised people by joking about it with him directly. Later, she even performed her own version of Dirty Diana as part of a live show introduction, a move many interpreted as her reclaiming the narrative rather than rejecting it. It became a defining example of their dynamic, a song born out of personal emotion, interpreted publicly as fiction, but treated privately by both of them as something neither could fully ignore. When Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009, the world reflected on his legacy. But those closest to him already understood that beneath the global fame, his emotional story had been shaped for decades by a relationship he never truly seemed able to resolve with Diana Ross. Diana Ross was named in the will of Michael Jackson in a way that immediately drew attention once it became publicly known. The clause was not framed as a symbolic gesture or passing mention. It was a clear instruction regarding custody of his children in a very specific scenario. According to the document, Michael stated that if his mother, Katherine Jackson, were ever unable to care for his children, he wanted Diana Ross to take custody of them. At the time, Michael had 3 children, and Katherine was already in her late 70s, which made the provision something that people interpreted as a serious contingency plan rather than a theoretical inclusion. What stood out most to observers was not just the legal detail itself, but what it suggested about trust. Michael had been raised by Katherine Jackson and remained deeply connected to his immediate family, yet in this specific and highly personal instruction, he chose someone outside the Jackson family entirely. He did not select siblings, relatives, longtime friends, or former partners who might have been considered natural guardians. Instead, he chose Diana Ross. For many people, that decision reinforced the extraordinary emotional weight she held in his life. Diana Ross was not simply a former mentor or an early career influence, or even just a past romantic fixation in the way the public often framed their relationship. In Michael's own legal planning, she was positioned as the one person he trusted most deeply with the care of his children if his mother could not fulfill that role. The inclusion of that clause led many fans and commentators to revisit everything associated with their relationship. The stories, the symbolism, the emotional intensity, and the decades of speculation about how central Diana Ross truly was in Michael's private world. Diana herself never publicly expanded in detail on the clause, and it remained one of the most quietly discussed elements of Michael Jackson's estate planning. Not because it was widely promoted, but because of what it appeared to reveal about the depth of a bond that had begun in childhood and, in some form, lasted throughout his entire life. She did not need to add anything further. The instruction itself already carried the weight of everything Michael Jackson was trying to express about the place Diana Ross held in his life. For many observers, the inclusion spoke louder than any interview or public statement ever could. In the way the story is often framed, Diana was the woman Michael Jackson could not have in the way he wanted, yet she remained a constant presence in his emotional world, regardless of time, distance, or other relationships. The will clause, whether interpreted practically or emotionally, was seen by some as the final chapter in a relationship that stretched across decades, beginning in his childhood, moving through fame, separation, and reinvention, and never fully resolving into something simple or closed. Over those years, their connection became layered with public narratives, private interpretations, and moments that people close to them have continued to debate ever since. Early mentorship, intense attachment, romantic speculation, professional collaboration, and repeated attempts at distance that never fully seemed to erase the bond. And even after Michael's death, Diana Ross continued to occupy a complicated space in how his legacy was discussed. When the documentary Leaving Neverland aired on HBO in March 2019, it reignited the most damaging allegations ever made against Michael Jackson, brought forward by Wade Robson and James Safechuck. The film had a major cultural impact, leading to renewed public debate, industry backlash, and projects associated with Michael being reconsidered or paused. The Jackson family strongly denied the allegations, and public reaction split sharply once again, with Michael's legacy becoming the center of global controversy. During this period, Diana Ross made one of the few high-profile public defenses from a major artist. She posted on social media calling Michael Jackson a magnificent and incredible force in her life and in the lives of many others. She also urged the public to stop the criticism, referencing the Supreme's song "Stop in the Name of Love" as a way of reinforcing her message, while not directly addressing the specific allegations. Her statement stood out precisely because of its restraint. In a moment when many public figures chose silence, distancing, or legal caution, Diana Ross instead chose to publicly affirm her connection to Michael, adding yet another layer to a relationship that had already spanned fame, controversy, admiration, and decades of unresolved history. She simply made it clear that she still believed in the man she had known for 40 years. In her own words, she said, "I refuse you to insult Michael. He's a friend of mine. Yeah, I love him, and I don't like people making fun of him." But that statement was far from universally accepted. A large portion of the public felt that her comments minimized or dismissed the experiences of the men who came forward in the documentary Leaving Neverland, where serious allegations against Michael Jackson were explored in detail and sparked global debate. Around the same time, singer Barbra Streisand made similar remarks, suggesting that Michael's behavior should be viewed through the lens of his own traumatic childhood, and pointing out that the accusers were now adults with families of their own. However, the backlash to Streisand's comments was immediate and intense, eventually leading her to walk them back and clarify that nothing could ever justify harm against children. Diana Ross, however, did not retract her statement. She stood firmly behind what she said. For many observers, her position reflected something deeper than a passing opinion. It came from a woman who had known Michael since he was 11 years old, who had lived with him during his childhood, who had been woven into his emotional world for decades, and who had even been named in his will as the person he trusted to care for his children under specific circumstances. Because of that history, her words weren't interpreted as a casual celebrity response. They were seen by some as coming from someone who had occupied a uniquely central role in his life, emotionally, personally, and historically. And for that reason, her defense of him became one of the most discussed moments in the broader conversation about his legacy. To some, it was loyalty. To others, it was denial. But either way, it reinforced just how deeply entangled their lives had remained, even decades after they first met. What Diana Ross said about Michael Jackson ultimately became, for many, the final reminder that their story had never been simple, never been fully closed, and never fully understood from the outside looking in. If you made it this far, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts. Do you think Diana was protecting Michael's legacy or speaking her truth from decades of personal history?